American Peasants Radio, Dirt Talk number 2, Gardening, Getting Started, Part 2, written and narrated by Dan Polk. In Part 1 of this audio series, we learned about the 3 basic methods or formats of gardening, all with the same goal of providing the garden with fresh fruits and vegetables for the home. The notion of the home garden or kitchen garden goes with the sense of being settled in one place for a long time. I'm reminded of the words of poet and activist Gary Snyder, who said, "Find your place on the planet, dig in and take responsibility from there." That says it all. Being tied to a piece of property has its trade-offs, but gardening on your own little piece of earth reminds one of all the old language, being down to earth, having your feet on the ground, being grounded, being the salt of the earth, and so forth. This reminds me of something I observed in about 1996 in the small town in Nebraska where I grew up. I'm a teacher by vocation. I was visiting my parents during the summer recess. This must have been early June. I realized in my absence that the house across the street from ours had sold and there were new owners in there. "They're Russians," my dad said. "You might be interested in what they're doing to the yard." My dad and I had done gardening together off and on for years, and he really liked to grow the giant beefsteak type tomatoes in the summer, the type that grows so well in that hot weather back in Nebraska. I happened to look across the street the next day, and I was interested in what was going on all right. There were several Russian women, I found out later they're actually Ukrainian, all in traditional costume with scarves over their hair, out digging up the double-sized lot the house across the street sat on. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, they spaded up almost every square foot available space and planted all in staple crops like potatoes, rutabagas, carrots, parsnips, onions, beets, turnips, cabbages, and various greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, and winter squashes. That may have been just about it, but I can't really remember precisely. The whole point, though, being is that this is a culture they were coming from. They couldn't imagine life without a vegetable garden. Having immigrated to the United States, they had found the American dream, a new place on the planet, and were digging in and taking responsibility. It was amazing to see this basically 19th century tableau play out in my own hometown, which itself had been the stage of earlier such stories played out 100 years before. In fact, the house I grew up in was about 100 years old that year. I've never forgotten that story, and my garden now just as much a part of my life as was theirs. This is a place many gardeners get to, and you might get there too. A few basic nutrients you want to learn about that you'll need along the way. These are all available in natural, organic forms, so you won't need to use harmful chemicals in your vegetable garden. 3 basic macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Let's take a look at the role of each one of these in plant health and the best natural sources of each. Before we do, there's something I want to mention and what you think about with regards to fertilizers versus insect control methods. Now, these amendments, these additives you put into the soil to help your plants grow and to keep them healthy are also pretty cheap and widely available. The science of combining them is also pretty straightforward and foolproof, and because the amendments we'll use are organic, it's not likely you're going to harm your plants by overdosing them or yourself from too much overexposure. You can mix the different amendments by hand. They won't hurt your skin or they're harmful to breathe in. I like what Steve Solomon has to say about them. Now, he's the guy that started Territorial Seeds here in Oregon. That's one of our big seed houses here in the Northwest. What he said was if you get the plant to grow faster than the insects can eat it, then you've won the game. Also, if those particular plants are tasty to insects, then that's the one that he wanted too because it might have the most flavor and nutrition. Pest control is a legitimate subject and one we'll cover. Basically, I do believe that if you worry about the vigor of the plant first, it should outgrow insect damage, outpace it, unless there's a giant infestation or patch of some kind. Then there are some secondary methods. Nitrogen is, now we're going to get started on the macronutrients themselves. Nitrogen is the nutrient that helps plants produce their vegetative or green leafy growth. It's important in all stages of development, but it's really crucial when the plant is small, as eventually the leaves will play a large role in feeding the plant, and that's through if it's root crops or if it's a fruiting and flowering plant, the leaves feed the rest of the plant through photosynthesis. And encouraging this early vegetative growth is going to help to ensure the plants are going to be vigorous enough to carry on that photosynthetic process and, again, outpace the insect damage and keep pace with your weather, and so you can harvest before the weather turns. Too much nitrogen can cause the plant to shut down and other process and uptaking other nutrition. So you shouldn't give it too much, your plants, and we'll have some guidelines. And some shouldn't get too much at all, like root crops and potatoes do not need excess nitrogen, and all the beans and peas that you're going to grow help fix some of their own nitrogen in the soil from the atmosphere, and they don't need as much to start and complete their growth cycle. Phosphorus helps healthy root development in plants with flowering and fruiting. Phosphorus also helps healthy seed development and with the transfer of energy in plants. Relatively more phosphorus is needed in root crops and fruiting and flowering stages of crops like tomatoes, squash, cucumber, melons, and so forth. Anything with the flowers and then fruits. These types of plants, it's impossible to either incorporate enough phosphorus at planting time or to include in later applications of fertilizer, so the gardener has to both include some at planting time and side dress later in the season, which means adding fertilizer around the roots and then working it in. Which fertilizer to use and the ratios which are combined applied will be covered shortly. Potassium is the third common macronutrient needed by green plants. It helps green plants produce sugars and other carbohydrates, helps plant become resistant to disease, and also in the uptake of carbon dioxide by plants because it regulates the opening and closing of what's called the stomata. Now, those are like the little pores in the leaves of the plant. It helps the plant absorb CO2, release oxygen. We all know photosynthesis. And also to transpire water, release water. And you have to have a balance of that because that's going to be crucial to the plant's growth and development. There's some minerals you want to consider too, and calcium is one of them. Calcium helps to strengthen plant walls, transport energy within the plant, and helps with root development. Sulfur, which helps the plant to absorb nutrients, and magnesium, essential in photosynthesis. Without these three nutrients, plants will not be vigorous enough to reach maturity. Calcium and magnesium are both abundant in agricultural lime. Sulfur may be added at planting time, may need time to break down. Your extension agent will be able to tell you if any nutrients are missing in local soils, and they can do some tests to confirm that suspicion or deny it. Most good organic potting soils will be balanced already, but will need amending in subsequent seasons. Now let's talk about the organic fertilizer that are rich in these nutrients. No chemical fertilizer additives are necessary in the garden if you follow these guidelines. In powdered form, I feel the most biologically available and affordable source of nitrogen is cottonseed meal. Of phosphorus, I think you want to go with your bone meal, and a potassium, let's go with your kelp meal. As mentioned, agricultural lime is a good source of magnesium and calcium. I add this in equal measure to phosphorus, bone meal, and potassium at planting time, as our soils are acid and short in magnesium. You may want to ask your extension agents about your local soils. It'll be a great resource for you. Planting time, I mix cottonseed meal 4-to-1 to the other three nutrients. I throw generous handfuls down the ground, work them in really well, big handful in each hole where I put a transplant, again, worked in and watered really well. Mid-season I fertilize again with a ratio of 1-to-1 of cottonseed meal, bone meal, and kelp meal. I do not add lime mid-season. I side dress the plants, meaning I work it in at the roots and water it in really well. Keep all organic fertilizers dry and they will last a long time. There's a good informative segment in episode 1 of my American Peasants documentary series, which is a companion series here on YouTube, in which I mix the fertilizers and explain the whole process. It might be informative for you to watch that segment and see what you can absorb. Now you're going to need a few tools as well. You can get by with a decent round-headed shovel, a sturdy rake, a simple hoe, and a trowel. These can be purchased cheaply at any local hardware store, garden center, or big box store. Seemingly difficult question of what to plant can be reduced to a simple answer. You should plant what you want to eat. Within reason, most garden crops can be grown in all the USDA zones in the United States. There are really good instructions right in the seed packages with the USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, maps include as well as planting dates. Probably won't be growing citrus in Minnesota, for example, but there are many other fruit trees that are just as rewarding that will thrive in that climate, and so forth with all the possibilities. The aim of this radio series is not only to instruct, but to inspire. You can grow a tremendous amount of food in a small space. This is not meant to be an exhaustive tutorial because beyond these basics, your energy level and interest will determine how far you take this as a hobby or lifestyle. There are plenty of resources at libraries, again, at your local county extension service, and online to answer virtually any question imaginable about any cultivation of any food crops. Modern life often moves so fast that we feel overwhelmed and we can't keep up. But by slowing down, by growing some of our own food and taking care of our health and living spaces, we can all live a saner, simpler life, a life that's closer to the heart. Join us as we sing the song of freedom. Dan Polk for American Peasants.